Hello and welcome to another episode in Smaulgld's series on the cashless society. Today we're going to talk about how did we get here? Well, for the most part, people think that the cashless society kind of sprung up in the last couple of years and has approached us with lightning speed, when in fact it started a long time ago. In fact, we're going to see it kind of started in 1913. Now, as the cashless society approaches us, and in some respects is already here, we ask, how did this happen? Now, for those of you interested in the cashless society, I have done a podcast called The Dark Side of a Cashless Society. It's part of the Smaulgld Dark Side series. I will put this one in the Dark Side series playlist as well. You can also read this blog post. I'll put a link below this YouTube. So in the first part of Welcome to the Cashless Society, I talked about there's no war on cash. And the reason I say there's no war on cash is a war requires two sides to fight. It seems as if the cashless society has been imposed upon us really without a battle whatsoever. Now in part two, we talked about the dark side of a cashless society, and we noted how privacy and liberty can be lost in a cashless society, and how dangerously close we are to already becoming one 100%. However, a cashless society also has the danger of becoming a priceless society. And I mean priceless like in it's the greatest thing in like Visa, priceless when something has a value that you can't put a price on because it's so wonderful. I'm talking about where prices are set by the government and purchases of set quantities of selected products or all products are mandated by the government at set prices. Think that can't happen? It's exactly what Obamacare is or was. They tell you have to buy it, the price is set, and since the price is set, you really have no choice other than to buy it. Now, how did we get to this point where money is not our own and we don't have control over it? Well, it's kind of like the boiled frog syndrome. As I mentioned at the start, this isn't some futuristic concept that arose out of nowhere. We've been heading towards a cashless society for decades, and it's only recently that people are starting to notice the transition to a totally cashless society. So it's kind of the boiled frog syndrome. For those of you who don't know that syndrome, it's where if you put a frog into a pot of boiling water, he will jump out immediately. However, if you cook the frog slowly in the water and you keep raising the temperature till it boils, the frog will not pay any attention to it until it's too late, and then he will die in the water. Sorry for that horrible image, but that's what the boiling frog syndrome is. Now we read stories about partial cash bans in some countries, Ireland banning small cash withdrawals, JP Morgan banning the storing of cash in safe deposit boxes. And all this seems so sudden, but the cashless society has been in planning and process for over a century. Here's what we're going to cover. So, the cashless society has its roots in changing laws, cultures, and technologies. Today we're going to talk about government actions. Since cash is pocketed freedom, in the words of Dostoevsky, government actions and central planning strive to eliminate that freedom by reducing the amount of cash citizens have, its value, and limiting and eventually eliminating the use of all cash. Governments also want to control how cash is spent and wish to know what people are spending money on to fight crime and income tax evasion, and also to develop, in a sense, a dossier on what people are spending their money on. Let's start with some of the major governmental actions that pulled the ability of individuals to use and spend their cash as they wish. Well, the first one is the creation of the Internal Revenue Service and the income tax. Now, prior to 1913, when they created the income tax, people would spend their money on things. They would get their paycheck or they would get their cash from their employer and they would spend it as they wish. What the income tax does is it basically removes a portion of your income over which you had direct control to spend and gives it to the government, who they decide how that money would be spent, or in many cases wasted. the U.S. used to fund its federal government on import duties. So in that case, the individual still got their money and they could spend 100% of their income however they choose. However they chose. Now, the original irony of the income tax of 1913, it was pitched as something for the 1%, and they were the ones who were going to be taxed. And of course, you could sell that to everyone because 99% of the people will vote for the 1% to be taxed. And that's what happened. It got passed as a constitutional amendment, and now you have an income tax. And it was only supposed to be a low rate. Well, we know now that the top tax rate is close to 40%. And the U.S. also has a very high corporate tax. So it was, again, like the boiling frog. It was introduced as something that only a small percentage of people would pay. They wouldn't pay that much. And now it's a fixture. Reminds me of the things that are inevitable. They say death and taxes. Well, originally, only death was inevitable. Taxes are kind of a man-made invention, which I suppose now are inevitable. Also, in 1913, the Federal Reserve System was created, and that created a nationwide Federal Reserve banking system that was intended to manage the nation's money supply and act as a bank of last resort in the event of bank failures. And since 1913, the US dollar has lost about 98% of its value, and we've been led to believe that inflation, like taxes and death, are inevitable. So now you add death, taxes, inflation. As if that is the normal course of things, is that your dollar is supposed to go down in value. Prior to 1913, you had deflation because you had lower prices because of industrial technology. The Industrial Revolution kept making things more efficient, better pricing, you got more products, and they kept costing less. Now, recently, the Federal Reserve and other central banks, they also try to convince the public that inflation is desirable. Think about the Fed's inflation target. They've got a 2% target inflation rate, as if inflation somehow causes economic progress. It reminds me of when somebody sees a car going really fast down the road and it's blowing smoke out, and they think, oh, because of all that smoke coming out of the car, that must be making the car go fast. No, that's probably what's slowing the car down. But central bankers either believe, or they tell us they believe, that somehow creating inflation creates a faster or better economy. Not true. So the Fed conducts monetary policy, which again injects itself into the markets by setting interest rates and manipulating the money supply. And so they create dollars and reallocate and distribute them where they see fit. And the Federal Reserve Reform Act of 1977 took the Federal Reserve and made it from just being a bank of last resort to one with this dual mandate where they're going to create maximum employment and stable prices. That's just a blank check for them to basically conduct monetary policy the way they see fit. This gives the Fed enormous power and leeway to conduct monetary policy. They can always say, like the politicians say, it's for the children. They can say it's to help the job market, and they're trying to create stable prices. Then you had QE from 2009 to 2014. They used this power to print dollars in order to buy Treasury securities and mortgage-backed securities to help alleviate the shocks from the financial crisis of 2008-2009. So, the Fed's actions, which were created in 1913, impacts the economic decisions that market participants make. When the Fed sets interest rates artificially low, money is cheap and people will be encouraged to spend it, perhaps recklessly, and discouraged from saving it. This has the effect of incentivizing people to give up their cash and to spend it instead. So by creating and directing flows of capital, the Fed removes individual and corporate power to decide how their money is spent by intentionally creating inflation. The Fed removes some of the value of individuals and corporates' money that's not already taxed by the IRS. And of course, the Federal Reserve and the IRS powers have grown significantly since their inception in 1913. One of the next acts that took away cash did it directly from U.S. citizens. In 1933, with a stroke of a pen, FDR issued Executive Order 6102 that removed gold coins that had been freely circulating as legal tender as money in the United States by requiring the U.S. citizens to turn their gold coins and other forms of gold to the U.S. government. Well, this directly pulled money out of the hands of individuals. In 1935, Congress passed the Social Security Act, which authorized amounts to be withheld directly from payroll checks in order to fund old age retirement program that they had invented. The Social Security tax removed cash directly off the top of employees' wages and required the employer to contribute an amount equal to the amount deducted from the employee's salary. So that money goes automatically in the form of Social Security withholdings, which means that cash is no longer under the worker's control and no longer under the employer's control, but rather under government control. And like the Federal Reserve, the Social Security Act has increased the amounts that it takes out. And in 1935, I don't remember what the percentage was. It was a small percentage that was taken out. That amount gets larger and larger each year, which means the amount of cash that's under the workers' and employers' control is less and less. Then in 1943, the Current Tax Payment Act required employees to withhold federal income tax from its employees' paychecks and submit them directly to the federal government on the employee's half. So it used to be before 1943, between the time they invented the income tax in 1913, you would get paid and then you'd have to figure out what you owe the federal government and you'd write them a check for the amount. Well, not good enough. They didn't trust you to, and a lot of people probably screwed this up. They did not have the ability to save the money properly in order to meet their tax obligation. So they invented the automatic payroll deduction in 1943, where basically the government was ensured that they would receive at least an estimate of what they were owed during the year rather than waiting to the end of the year or in April to get their money. Then in 1965, you had the Medicare Amendment Act to the Social Security Act. Well, if it wasn't enough that the government was going to take out money for your old age retirement, they were now going to take out money for Medicare. And Medicare deductions meant U.S. employees now had 3 automatic federal withholdings from their wages: Social Security, income tax, and Medicare. We still have those today. Then, from 1963 to 1968, the United States decided to remove the silver certificates from circulation, decided to demonetize silver and take away the silver coins. And so now no longer is gold allowed, it is no longer legal tender, nor is silver. And silver coins were massively circulating in the United States. They were 90% silver, 10% copper. There were billions of those coins in circulation. People could hold on to them. They represented the actual value of the face value. They weren't just an invention. A quarter is worth of silver at the time at the then going price. And today we have coins that just have things stamped on them, but the metallic value of a quarter is only a few cents. Same with a dime. But back then, you had a quarter in your hand. As you can see on this chart, you've got the actual amount of pure silver that's in each coin. So a half dollar had 0.36 ounces, a quarter had 0.18, and a dime had 0.07. So you had real money in your hand. Well, they took that out of your hands in between 1963 and 1968 when they eliminated the silver coinage and also eliminated the ability to turn in your coins, turn in your silver certificates for silver dollars. Then in 1969, they removed U.S. bills larger than $100 from circulation. In 1969, Secretary of Treasury David Kennedy and the Fed announced they would immediately stop distributing currencies in denominations higher than 100. At the time, there was a $500 bill featuring President McKinley, a $1,000 bill featuring President Cleveland, and a $5,000 featuring President Madison. There was also a $10,000 bill featuring Senator Salmon Chase. The stated reason at the time? The main purpose was for bank transfer payments, meaning at the time, people didn't walk around with $500 bills, $1,000 bills, and so on. They were generally used for interbank transactions. However, they were saying with the arrival of more secure transfer technologies, they were no longer needed for that purpose. Well, today, having a $100 bill in your wallet, that doesn't make you a rich person. It used to. Uh, so you can argue that what they did then did make sense. However, it was just another way that people could not have cash in their hand in large amounts. They had to go down to the $100 bill. Now they're still talking about eliminating the $100 bill. And they would not be eliminating the $100 bills because the reason wouldn't be because banks use them for big transactions. No, they'd be doing it to take it away from individuals. In 1969, they were saying that at least a $100 bill back then was a valid denomination for ordinary circulation. But then you've got guys like Lawrence Summer, former Treasury Secretary. He did an editorial saying it's time to kill the $100 bill. And that was based on a contemporaneous decision about a year ago that the European Union was talking about eliminating the 500 euro bill. And the rationale there is that these notes of large denominations are highly irresponsible and mostly a boon to corruption and crime. So if a small percentage of the population uses cash to commit crimes, then basically the mentality is, well, we can use that as an excuse to take cash away from all the law-abiding citizens. Then in 1970, Bank Secrecy Act. The Congress passed the Bank Secrecy Act that required banks to file reports of transactions with its customers of more than $10,000 in a single day and to file suspicious activity reports regarding potential money laundering, tax evasion, or other suspected criminal activity. Now, $10,000 in 1970 was a big deal. Today, not so much. It's possible that small businesses and even people of modest or wealthy means could be making transactions of $10,000 in a single day. This means perfectly legal transactions over $10,000 would be reported as a matter of course by banks, and legal transactions that bank in their discretion believe might involve money laundering or tax evasion or criminal activity. Well, how does a bank know? You look funny when you bring the money in. So here's another way where any amounts over a certain amount are automatically reported, and puts the onus on the bank to kind of err on the side of caution that, this customer we don't know, might be doing something wrong. Well, the way it works with civil forfeiture is if they see these transactions in and out of your account, and there may be a perfectly reasonable or rational explanation, has nothing to do with crime, law enforcement has the ability, like the IRS, without notice or reason given, just to freeze your bank account because they view these activities as suspicious, or you're doing it to structure transactions to avoid reporting requirements. So they could just seize your account. And the IRS did seize more than $242 million from over 2,500 accounts for illegal structuring deposits or withdrawals. 1/3 of these cases resulted in no criminal charges and involved deposits and withdrawals under $10,000. So again, you can see how the government can decide that you're doing something wrong before they actually charge you with doing anything wrong. And of course, you could say, well, I got out of it because I didn't do anything wrong. Well, you spent a lot of time, effort, and potentially legal fees trying to explain that you didn't do anything wrong, whereas before this rule, you didn't have to explain yourself, especially if you've done nothing wrong other than move some money around. Well, in 1971, Nixon's breach of the Bretton Woods Gold Standards Agreement. So this is all before cashless society. You can see how your money is already not your own in many circumstances, through taxation, through regulation, through them removing the coinage, the gold coins, the silver coins. Well, in 1971, Nixon pulled out of the Bretton Woods Agreement, which was allowing central banks to redeem their dollars for gold at the U.S. Treasury. Richard Nixon went on TV and said you can't do that anymore, or at least temporarily you can't do it anymore. But that temporary suspension of the ability to convert dollars into gold remains to this day. Well, well, you say, well, that didn't take any money out of the people's hands. Sure did. It may not, it may have only applied to central banks, but what it did was it created massive inflation when the US went off the gold standard, which is another way where money or value of money can be taken away from you via government action, is through inflation. So it's not just through the inflation of the Federal Reserve printing money through things like QE, or having these inflation targets that they try to meet through monetary policy, but a presidential executive order like Richard Nixon's in 1971 can create a massive amount of inflation, or like Franklin Delano Roosevelt's action in 1933 and the subsequent revaluing of gold in 1934 also created massive inflation, because they collected the gold from the people at $20.67, and then they revalued the gold price in 1934 pursuant to the Gold Act of 1934 to $35 an hour, effectively resulting in a devaluation of the dollar. So that's another way that they have taken money or value from your hands, is through executive orders. 2001, U.S. Patriot Act expanded the reporting requirements of transactions over $10,000 to merchants selling consumer durables like cars, rugs, antiques, metals, gems, stamps, or coins, or travel or entertainment services. Now, of course, the reason was to fight terrorism, but it applies to all U.S. citizens, irrespective of the legality or intent of their transactions. 2010, FACTA. Congress enacted FACTA in 2010 to target U.S. taxpayers who might be using foreign accounts to avoid payment of taxes. FACTA requires foreign financial institutions and U.S. citizens to report financial information to the IRS relating to accounts held by U.S. taxpayers overseas. Now, you have millions of people that live overseas that are Americans. So, of course, they have bank accounts overseas. They don't have those bank accounts to avoid paying taxes. They have those bank accounts because they live in France, they live in Hungary, wherever they live, and they have to have a bank account. But if they fail to report their bank account, there's steep fines and loss of the account. They can seize the account, and they don't have to show criminal intent to impose the penalties or to confiscate the assets. They only have to show that you failed to disclose those assets. So again, you're living overseas, or you're an American, you happen to have a foreign bank account for whatever reason. You have, you're doing currency trading, who knows. You don't have to have any criminal intent, but if you fail to report it, that money can be taken from you and you could be fined. The Affordable Health Care Act, as we talked about in 2010. This marked the first time that the U.S. government could require its citizens to purchase a product or service. Under the Affordable Health Care Act, U.S. citizens must purchase a qualifying health pay or plan or pay a tax penalty if they do not comply. The loophole here is that the court did not say it was constitutional, and did not say it was okay for the government to force a citizen to buy a product as a matter of statute. They said that if you don't buy a product, then it's okay to tax you for having not done so. So it's a bit of a legal fiction that they created in order to preserve the Affordable Care Act, but still, it's another way where the government, either through taxation or mandate, can require you to spend money that you otherwise might not have spent. MIRA, 2014-2015. This one hasn't come to fruition yet. You're now allowed, as a feature, to purchase by option U.S. Treasury bonds through automatic withholdings from your paycheck. So they started this in late 2015. The president announced it in 2014 in the State of the Union address. But for those citizens who do participate and have their money taken out to go into buying U.S. Treasury bonds for their investment purposes, now have a Social Security, a federal income tax, Medicare, and MIRA withholdings, in addition to their health care plan holdings as well. So, and of course, there's state and local taxes that get withheld from the paycheck. So the average worker today has got money flying out of his account left and right before he gets the actual money. 100 years ago, if you negotiated with your employer to get $100 a month, you got $100 a month, and that was your money to spend as you see fit. Now, the MIRA may eventually become a mandated savings plan. Who knows? They may decide that Social Security is not adequate, and they may decide that foreigners are not purchasing enough U.S. Treasury bonds, and it's the patriotic thing to do. So we're just going to deduct a small percentage to start with out of your account for your own benefit to invest in U.S. Treasuries. Now, the last thing would be, negative interest rates. Now, the United States hasn't gone that route, and I don't think that they will, but negative interest rates effectively make it economically unfeasible to hold cash, as the holder must pay the bank to keep it for them. Under a negative interest rate regime, people have no incentive to save money in banks, so they either spend it or put in other potentially appreciating assets like stocks or bonds. People wishing not to pay the bank for the privilege of having their cash stored there may hoard cash in other places. Now, the government can get around that and tell you, just like they did in India, all those cash bills that you now have, well, they're no good anymore. You're gonna have to turn those in and then, or put them in the bank, so they can take away the value of the cash that you currently have by telling them, look, we issued this cash. It's no longer worth anything unless you turn it back into us and get new notes or put it into the bank. And if you put it in the bank, then there's negative interest rates. So you can't even avoid the negative interest rates by hoarding cash if the government gets clever and says, well, the cash you hold that's dated X date and before is no longer any good. You have to turn it in over the next week or so. Otherwise, that cash is not worth anything. There's stories of that happening to people in Sweden where they had old bills. They brought them in and they said, no, we're not going to accept these. And the rationale was, you can't explain how you got that money. Well, okay. That means the money is not good or fungible. It's only good or fungible if you can explain how you got it, or if the government, the issuer, wishes to give it value. So all the foregoing government actions have had the effect of taking cash outright or forcibly redirecting it. And going cashless is not all about government. There's cultural and technological reasons that are also pushing us towards a cashless society. So next time we're going to talk about technological and cultural reasons, and some of them are good, why we're heading in that direction. Thanks for listening.